shadows, threw parties for children, and shook the hands of dignitaries. But behind closed doors, where the lights were low and the crawl space colder than it should be, lay a secret so grotesque, it seemed impossible one man could carry it alone. How does someone bury horror beneath a suburban floorboard and still walk among us untouched, adored, even applauded? When that horror finally came to light, why did so many questions remain buried with it? Welcome, dear friends, to Deadly Whispers. Tonight, we're stepping into the quiet corners of a story that truly captured my attention, and I hope it will yours too. So, dim the lights, find your calm, and let's gently explore the shadows of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, and the accomplice theory. But before we do, if you're settling in with us, take a moment to leave a quiet comment below, letting me know where in the world you're listening from. If you find peace in these stories, a gentle like and subscribe truly helps our quiet community grow. Now, let's begin. John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born on March 17, 1942. From the outside, his family might have seemed like any other working-class family in post-war America. But behind closed doors, it was a private dictatorship ruled by his father, John Gacy Sr. Gacy Sr. was a man of immense contradictions, a decorated World War I veteran who was also a violent, abusive alcoholic. For his son, he was the source of a constant, simmering terror. The abuse was relentless and multifaceted. It was physical beatings with a leather belt were a regular occurrence for the slightest perceived infraction. But perhaps more damaging was the psychological warfare. Gacy Sr. relentlessly demeaned his son for not fitting his narrow ideal of masculinity. Because young John suffered from a heart condition and struggled with his weight, he couldn't play sports. To his father, this wasn't a medical issue, it was a character flaw. He called his son a sissy, a queer, mocking him in front of others, hammering home the message that he was a constant disappointment. Life added its own layers of trauma. At age 11, a swing set accident resulted in a head injury that caused a blood clot in his brain. For the next few years, Gacy would suffer from blackouts, losing time and memory. As father's reaction, he accused him of faking it for attention. Then, at the tender age of 8, a moment of horror that would remain buried for decades, Gacy was sexually molested by a family friend. Paralyzed by the fear of his father's explosive rage, he told no one. The secret festered, teaching him a powerful, dark lesson about shame, power, and the things that happen in the shadows. As a young man, Gacy desperately tried to earn his father's approval. At 18, he became an assistant precinct captain for the Democratic Party, position of some local importance. His father only disparaged it. Every attempt at connection was met with a wall of contempt. It was a crucible of resentment, forging a young man who craved power and control above all else because he had never had any. In 1962, after dropping out of high school, Gacy made a decision that, in hindsight, feels like a chilling prophecy. He moved to Las Vegas and took a job as a mortuary attendant. It was here, in the silent, sterile rooms of the dead, that he experienced what he would later call a dark awakening. One night, his curiosity turned into something monstrous. He climbed into a coffin with the corpse of a teenage boy who had died in a car accident and laid there, cuddling the body. He described the experience as both shocking and profoundly pleasurable. It was the moment his internal pathology found a physical expression connecting death, power, and a twisted form of intimacy. This would define the rest of his life. But the world didn't see this. After this incident, he fled back to the safety of a normal life, returning to Chicago, attending business college and excelling in sales. He was charming, glib, and ambitious. He was learning to perfect the mask, the friendly and outgoing persona that would become his most dangerous weapon. In 1964, the mask was fully in place. Gacy married a co-worker, Marilyn Myers, and moved to Waterloo, Iowa, to manage his father-in-law's 3 KFC restaurants. He had done it. He had achieved the American dream. He was a husband, soon to be a father to a son and a daughter, a respected local businessman, and an active member of the JC Civic Organization. He was the man his father always claimed he could never be. But beneath the surface of this idyllic life, the darkness was stirring. In the basement of his comfortable home, Gacy created a secret club, He would invite his young male employees over, plying them with alcohol and pornography, slowly blurring the lines between employer and predator. His position of authority gave him immense power over these teens, who looked up to him and were eager for his approval. In August 1967, he crossed the line from coercion into outright violence. He sexually assaulted a 15-year-old employee named Donald Voorhees. Unlike others, Voorhees found the courage to speak up. He told his father, and an investigation began. Gacy's reaction was pure narcissistic rage. He failed a polygraph test and then tried to intimidate his victim into silence by hiring another employee to beat him up. This added another charge to his indictment. During the legal proceedings, doctors diagnosed Gacy with antisocial personality disorder. They issued a stark and unambiguous warning to the court. He was a dangerous individual who would almost certainly reoffend. The system had been alerted. The red flag was raised. On December 3, 1968, justice seemed to be served. Gacy was convicted of sodomy and sentenced to 10 years in state prison. On the very same day, his carefully constructed life fell apart. His wife Marilyn divorced him and was granted sole custody of their children. John Gacy would never see his children again. The mask had shattered. But here, the story takes its first tragic turn. This is the moment where the system had a chance to contain the monster, and it failed spectacularly. Inside prison, Gacy was the perfect manipulator. He became a model prisoner, organizing events, cooking for inmates, and charming the guards. He convinced the parole board that he was reformed, a changed man, and they believed him. On June 18, 1970, after serving just 18 months of his 10-year sentence, John Wayne Gacy was granted parole. The man who doctors warned would reoffend was set free, returning to Chicago to live with his mother. A decision with consequences so catastrophic, they are almost impossible to measure. Back in Chicago, Gacy was a convicted sex offender on parole, but you wouldn't know it. The system that released him failed to track him. In February 1971, he was charged again with sexual assault on a teenage boy. But when the victim failed to appear in court, the charges were dropped. His parole officer was never even made aware of the arrest. In August of that year, he and his mother moved to the now infamous address 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park. This unassuming house on a quiet tree-lined street would become his kingdom and his graveyard. He started his own construction business, PDM Contractors. This gave him a steady income and, more importantly, a constant supply of vulnerable young men looking for work. And then he created his ultimate disguise. Gacy joined the local Jolly Joker Clown Club and invented his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. He was a natural. He entertained at children's parties, charity events, and hospital wards. He brought joy and laughter to hundreds. The community adored him. It was the perfect cover, a persona so wholesome it was beyond suspicion. Years later, he would chillingly remark to a detective, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." On January 2nd, 1972, he proved himself right. He picked up 16-year-old Timothy McCoy at a bus station, lured him back to Somerdale Avenue, and stabbed him to death. He later described the act as giving him a mind-numbing orgasm. Revealing his horrifying discovery that death was the ultimate thrill, he buried Timothy's body in the crawl space beneath his home and poured concrete over the grave. The killing had begun. He married a childhood friend, Carol Hoff, later that year. She soon noticed a peculiar, cloying smell from the crawl space, an odor that seemed to worsen in the summer heat. But Gacy, ever the smooth talker, dismissed it as sewer runoff or dampness from the soil. The killing continued. An unidentified victim in 1974 strangled. From this, Gacy learned to refine his methods, stuffing rags in his victims' orifices to prevent leakage during decomposition. In 1975, he murdered an 18-year-old employee, John Budkovich. The same year, a 15-year-old employee named Anthony Antonucci had a miraculous escape. Gacy tried his handcuff magic trick on him, but Antonucci not only slipped out of the cuffs but managed to cuff Gacy back. Stunned, Gacy let him go. It was a rare moment of failure, a reminder that he was not invincible. The critical turning point came when Gacy came out as bisexual to his wife, Carol. Their marriage crumbled and she divorced him. Now, for the first time, Gacy had the house on Summerdale Avenue all to himself. He had total privacy and total control. With that, the floodgates of his depravity swung wide open. The murder rate accelerated dramatically. The years 1976 and 1977 were a blur of unimaginable horror. He perfected his routine, luring young men with promises of work, drugs, or money. He would use his handcuff trick or his rope trick, strangling them while he assaulted them. The crawl space began to fill. Daryl Sampson, 18. Randall Wright, 15. Samuel Stapleton, 14. Gregory Godzik, 17. The names became a tragic litany of stolen lives. Each was a young man with a future erased and entombed in the damp, dark earth beneath the suburban home. During this time, there were more near misses, more clues that went ignored. A young man named David Graham, who Gacy had offered a job, escaped to assault attempts. He would later tell police a story that should have set off alarm bells everywhere. Gacy had made him dig long, deep trenches in the crawl space. Graham described the unnerving experience of being in that dark, cramped space, digging what felt unsettlingly like graves. This was all under the guise of drainage work. Remember that detail, another survivor. Jeffrey Rignall wasn't as lucky. Gacy tortured and raped him before dumping him in a park. Rignall, battered but alive, went to the police with a license plate number and a detailed description. But they didn't take him seriously. They believed Gacy's story that it was a consensual encounter. The system failed again. Meanwhile, neighbors reported hearing muffled screams from the house at night. Sounds that were disturbing but always explained away. The horror was hiding in plain sight, protected by the friendly facade of the man who dressed as a clown. By 1978, Gacy had a logistical problem. His crawl space was full. His solution was as cold and pragmatic as the man himself. He began dumping bodies in the nearby Des Plaines River. His arrogance was at its peak. In May of that year, he passed a Secret Service background check and had his picture taken with First Lady Rosalind Carter. The killer was shaking hands with the highest echelons of power. But his reign of terror was about to come to an end, all because of one boy and one mother who refused to give up. On the evening of December 11, 1978, a 15-year-old honor student named Robert Pius finished his shift at a local pharmacy. He told his mother he was going to meet with a local contractor about a summer job that paid well. Contractor's name was John Gacy, but Pius was never seen alive again. His mother, Elizabeth Pius, felt a deep maternal dread. This wasn't a runaway. This was her son. She immediately reported him missing. Her fierce, unrelenting determination landed the case on the desk of Lieutenant Joseph Kozinczyk of the Des Plaines Police. Kozinczyk, a seasoned officer, listened to her frantic pleas and took her seriously. Suspicion immediately fell on Gacy. His odd, evasive behavior and the fresh mud on his shoes when questioned were the first red flags. There was a slickness to his answers that felt rehearsed, a charm that seemed designed to deflect. It was the kind of performance that makes the hair on the back of a veteran cop's neck stand up. The police obtained a search warrant. As they moved through the strangely neat house, the threads of Gacy's secret world began to unravel. They found gay pornography, handcuffs, and rope, the tools of a trade they had yet to fully comprehend. Then came the first solid links. Detective found a small, crumpled receipt from the very pharmacy where Robert worked. A receipt that had been inside Robert's jacket. It was a jolt of electricity in the investigation. Then another officer found a high school class ring. It didn't belong to Robert Pius. It belonged to John Schick, a boy who had been missing for 2 years. The room went quiet. The investigators exchanged grim looks. This was no longer just about Robert Pius. This was something bigger, older, and far more sinister. Then came the moment from the opening of our story. While in the house, Officer Bob Schultz flushed a toilet, activating the furnace. The smell of death, potent and undeniable, filled the room. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was physical evidence. It was the probable cause they needed for a second, more invasive warrant to dig up the property. Gacy, cornered, tried one last desperate gambit, filing a lawsuit against the police for harassment. But it was too late. Under 24/7 surveillance, he began to crack. He went to his lawyer's office, got drunk, and confessed to killing 32 men before passing out. On December 21st, police arrested him on a minor marijuana charge, just to hold him while they executed the second warrant. Gacy, ever the narcissist, told them he'd help so they wouldn't dirty his carpets, and drew them a map. The excavation began, and the scene descended into a living nightmare. Detective Rafael Tovar described the work as a descent into hell. The stench was unbearable. The wet, clay-like soil clung to everything. Pulling off their gloves, they had to dig by hand, carefully so as not to destroy the evidence that could identify the dead. Then Tovar's hand hit something solid. It wasn't a rock. He cleared the mud away to reveal the unmistakable pale curve of a human femur. A collective, horrified gasp went through the team. It was the first of many. Soon they were finding more bones, skulls, piles of human remains tangled together. It slowly dawned on the detectives they weren't investigating a single murder. They were standing atop a mass grave. 26 bodies were unearthed from the crawl space. 3 more were found buried elsewhere on the property. 4 more were pulled from the river. The friendly contractor, the funny clown, the pillar of the community was a facade. The reality was a monster who had turned his quiet suburban home into his own personal cemetery. The trial ended. John Wayne Gacy was found guilty of 33 murders and sentenced to death. The media called him the killer clown, the ultimate lone wolf predator. The book, it seemed, was closed. The monster was caged and the official story was written. One man, one house, one unspeakable chapter of American crime. But what if that story, the one we all know, is fundamentally wrong? What if the neat narrative of a lone killer, presented by the prosecution and cemented in history, is a dangerous oversimplification? For decades, whispers and troubling evidence have suggested a much darker, more complex reality. This reality points toward the chilling possibility that John Wayne Gacy did not act alone. It also suggests the full truth of his crimes was deliberately left buried. Let's begin with the central, glaring contradiction that baffled investigators from the start, the question of simple physics. We are asked to believe that one man, John Wayne Gacy, single-handedly murdered, transported, and buried nearly 30 human bodies. He was a portly, out-of-shape man in his 30s with a known heart condition. The burial site wasn't an open field. It was a claustrophobic, dirt-floored labyrinth of pipes and foundations, with a ceiling so low he couldn't even stand upright. The sheer physical exertion required is staggering. But this paradox transforms into a potential conspiracy the moment you discover that Gacy was not, in fact, alone in that house. During the height of his killing spree, 2 young men were living with him as employees and lodgers. Their testimony at trial is perhaps the most infuriating and mysterious aspect of this entire case. Under oath, they admitted that Gacy had instructed them to dig several long trenches in the crawl space. The official reason he gave them: drainage issues. Let's be clear, you don't use shovels to dig 6-foot long, 2-foot wide trenches for drainage in a crawl space. And you certainly don't use agricultural lime, a chemical agent notoriously used to accelerate decomposition and neutralize the smell of death. Yet, this is precisely what they did. Their defense was a wall of convenient ignorance. They claimed they were just following their boss's orders and had no idea what the true purpose of their work was. This story, so implausible it borders on the absurd, was a critical juncture in the investigation. It should have been shattered under intense cross-examination, but it wasn't. The prosecution, laser-focused on Gacy, seemed to accept their story. With that acceptance, a vital avenue of investigation into a wider conspiracy was slammed shut. The narrative was simplified, and potential accomplices were reclassified as mere witnesses. But the accomplice theory doesn't hinge solely on suspicion. It is supported by the irrefutable sworn testimony of a man who survived the nightmare, Jeffrey Rignall. In court, in a testimony so harrowing it caused jurors to physically vomit, Rignall recounted hours of brutal torture at Gacy's hands, and he delivered the bombshell. At one point during the assault, another man aided Gacy. An accomplice was in the room. This was no longer a theory. It was an eyewitness account from a victim, placing a second attacker at the scene of the crime. This testimony should have blown the case wide open. It should have triggered a manhunt for John Doe number 2, but a DID in single quotes T.Y. The most cynical and likely explanation is that prosecutors prefer clean narratives. A single, monstrous defendant is a straightforward story for a jury. A complex conspiracy with unidentified players, conflicting motives, and loose ends is messy. It risks a weaker case, maybe even an acquittal. So, a choice appears to have been made, sacrifice the pursuit of a larger truth for the certainty of convicting one man. Rignall's testimony, a desperate cry pointing to a wider evil, was effectively ignored. Another investigative path had a dead end, possibly by design. This circle of questionable ignorance extended even to his wife, Carol Hoff, who lived upstairs while the horrors unfolded below. She admitted to noticing the peculiar odor, to finding wallets of strange young men, to seeing teenagers being led into the garage. Was it profound denial or a survival mechanism built on not asking questions she didn't want the answers to? Her presence adds another layer of suffocating mystery, another person in close proximity who chose, for whatever reason, not to see. When you factor in accomplices, the scope of Gacy's evil potentially explodes beyond the confines of his Chicago home. His lawyer, Karen Conti, is convinced he killed at least 20 more victims during his frequent, weeks-long business trips. The lone wolf theory makes this difficult to imagine, but with help with someone to watch his back and help dispose of a body in a remote area, it becomes frighteningly plausible. The accomplice theory doesn't just change the story of what happened at 8213 West Summerdale. It suggests that the official victim count of 33 might be a fraction of the real number. Dozens more victims may lie in undiscovered graves across the Midwest. The official story of John Wayne Gacy is one of a lone monster captured and brought to justice. But the evidence whispers a different, more disturbing tale. It's a story of physics that don't add up and of convenient ignorance from those who lived with him. It includes a survivor's ignored testimony and a prosecution that prioritized the conviction over truth. John Wayne Gacy is dead, but the evidence screams that his secrets did not die with him. And it leaves us with the most chilling question of all. Did the conviction of one monster provide the perfect cover for others to escape? And is it possible that somewhere out there, accomplices to these horrific crimes simply vanished back into society and got away with murder? We have journeyed through the horrifying timeline of John Wayne Gacy's crimes. We have explored the disturbing, unanswered questions that suggest the official story is incomplete. Now, we must step back from the what and the what if, and confront the most difficult questions of all. Why? How does a human being become a vessel for such absolute evil? More importantly, how does a society allow that evil to hunt in its midst undetected? For so long, the answer is not simple. It's not a single point of failure. The story of John Wayne Gacy is the story of a perfect storm, a confluence of two powerful and destructive forces. First was the broken, twisted psychology of the man himself. The second was the network of cracks and blind spots in the very fabric of the society that was supposed to protect its citizens. To truly understand this case, we must dissect them both. To be clear, analyzing Gacy's psychology is not an attempt to excuse his actions. There is no excuse. Rather, it is an attempt to understand the mechanics of a monstrous mind, to map the origins of a predator. The foundation of Gacy's psyche was laid in his childhood home under the tyrannical rule of his father. This was not merely strict parenting. It was a systematic campaign of psychological destruction. Every time Gacy Sr. beat his son with a belt, called him a sissy, or accused him of faking his heart condition, he inflicted a profound narcissistic injury. He was drilling a core belief into his son: you are worthless, you are a disappointment, you are fundamentally flawed. This constant degradation created a bottomless well of shame and rage. He painted hundreds of pictures of clowns and skulls, wrote artifacts that people shockingly paid thousands for. He became a brand, a grotesque caricature of evil, soaking in the infamy he had cultivated. Then, on May 10, 1994, the state of Illinois prepared to close the book. His final meal was a strange mix of fried shrimp, French fries, strawberries, and a bucket of KFC chicken. This was a final nod, perhaps, to the legitimate life he once pretended to have in Iowa. As he was strapped to the gurney, a popular myth arose that his final words were a defiant "kiss my ass." But the truth, according to his lawyer and the prosecutor present, was far more chilling. John Wayne Gacy, the man who never stopped talking, the master manipulator, said nothing at all. He faced his end in silence. The execution itself was reportedly botched, a chemical failure causing the process to drag on. Even in his final moments, the case was mired in grim, unsettling detail. Bear's death, his brain was removed and given to forensic psychiatrists. This was a final, desperate attempt by science to find a physical source for the abyss that existed within his skull. But it offered no easy answers. The man was gone, but the evil he unleashed, and the questions he left behind remained. A story this dark inevitably leaves deep scars on the cultural psyche, but in its wake, it also forces change. The Gacy case served as a brutal, undeniable wake-up call. The world learned that the 72-hour waiting period for missing persons, based on the assumption that a teenager was a runaway, was a deadly flaw. The fierce advocacy of parents like Elizabeth Piest led directly to the Missing Child Recovery Act of 1984. This was the direct forerunner to the Amber Alert system. It is a powerful legacy because of the lessons learned in the crawl space of Somerdale Avenue. Countless other children have been found. Countless other families have been spared a similar nightmare. In this, there is a glimmer of light, a testament that even from the deepest darkness, progress can be born. However, for every systemic safeguard that was built, a human scar remains. The ripple effects of Gacy's cruelty spread far beyond the victims themselves. The prosecutor, Terry Sullivan, was so haunted by the case that he stopped taking on murder trials, saying he simply could not bear it anymore. Kimberly Byers-Lund, the friend of Robert Pius, whose photo receipt helped catch Gacy, spoke of being plagued by a near-paranoid fear for the rest of her life. She was forever checking locks, forever seeing a monster in the shadows. The trauma Gacy inflicted was a poison that seeped into the lives of everyone it touched. A generational pain that time could dull but never erase, and that brings us to the most profound silence of all. The final, haunting legacy of this case is not found in the court transcripts or the psychological profiles, but in the identities of the lost. When the digging stopped, 8 of the victims remained nameless. They were given a proper burial under headstones carved, with a simple, heartbreaking promise: we are remembered. In the decades since, forensic science has fought to give them their names back. In 2011, advanced DNA testing identified William George Bundy. In 2017, James Byron Hawkinson. In 2021, Francis Wayne Alexander. After decades of being John Doe, they were finally returned to their families as sons. As brothers, they were remembered. But even today, the silence is not completely broken. To this day, 6 of John Wayne Gacy's victims remain unidentified. 6 young men, each with a story. A family, a future that was stolen from them, are known only as numbers. They are the ultimate symbols of this unfinished story, a constant, solemn reminder that for some, there is no closure. Who were they? What dreams did they have? Who spent a lifetime waiting for a phone call that would never come in the end? The case of John Wayne Gacy is a labyrinth of horror with many corridors. It's a story of profound psychological damage, of catastrophic systemic failure, of unresolved mysteries, and of unimaginable loss. It stripped away our comforting belief that evil is obvious, that monsters look like monsters. Gacy's greatest weapon was his normality, his chilling ability to wear the mask of a friend, a neighbor, a funny clown. He proved that the most terrifying darkness can hide in the most ordinary of places. The final, lasting lesson of John Wayne Gacy is not about the monster who lived among us. It's that the monster looked just like us. In response, Gacy developed a grandiose, narcissistic personality as a defense mechanism. If the world saw him as worthless, he would build an internal world where he was all-powerful. His later crimes can be seen as a twisted, lifelong quest to reverse this dynamic. He targeted the very type of young, virile men that his father would have admired and that he could never be. By dominating, torturing, and ultimately destroying them, he was symbolically destroying his own feelings of inadequacy. He was enacting a horrifying revenge against the ghost of his father. He became the one in control, the one inflicting pain, the ultimate authority. One of the most terrifying aspects of Gacy is that he was not, in the legal sense, insane. The jury rejected his defense of insanity, and psychiatric experts largely agreed. He knew right from wrong, he simply didn't care. Gacy was a classic psychopath, diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. This meant he possessed a chilling combination of traits, a complete lack of empathy, and an inability to form genuine emotional connections. He also had a grandiose sense of self-worth and a stunning capacity for deceit. His entire public life was a testament to this. The successful businessman, the friendly neighbor, the political precinct captain, these were not genuine aspects of his personality. They were roles he played, costumes he wore, and his greatest costume, of course, was Pogo the Clown. It's crucial to understand that Pogo wasn't a split personality hiding a darker one. Pogo was the tool perfected by the darkness. It was a brilliantly effective weapon that weaponized society's trust and innocence to grant him access to families and communities. It gave him a veneer of harmlessness. The mask wasn't there to hide the monster. The mask was the monster's favorite way to hunt. His attempt to fake multiple personality disorder during his trial, inventing the violent alter ego Bad Jack to take the blame, was his final desperate act. He had spent his life fooling everyone around him. He believed he could fool the justice system itself. He failed, but the attempt revealed the core of his being, a man who saw other people not as human, but as pawns in his game. He saw rules as things to be bent for his own gratification. Gacy told investigators that for him, death was the ultimate thrill. He gave us the clearest window into his motivation. This was not a passion for violence in the way a soldier might have. For Gacy, the thrill was about absolute, ultimate control. In the final moments of his victims' lives, he possessed something he had craved since childhood, total power over another human being. He could decide their fate. He was God. To achieve this, he had to completely dehumanize his victims. In his own mind and in his own words, they were trash, nobodies, human garbage. By reducing them to objects, he freed himself from any flicker of conscience. This explains his chilling detachment, a trait so profound it bordered on the surreal. It's why he could fall asleep in the middle of his confession to his lawyer. It's why his primary concern after confessing to burying a house full of bodies was whether the police would dirty his carpets. The lives of 33 young men were an inconvenience. His beige carpeting was a priority. It is in this grotesque disparity that we see the true emptiness of a psychopath's soul. A predator as prolific as Gacy cannot operate in a vacuum. He was able to hunt for years, not just because he was cunning, but because he was hunting in a forest full of broken branches and blind turns. He exploited systemic vulnerabilities in society with deadly precision. First, we must examine the justice system not just for its procedural errors, but for its philosophical ones. The chain of failures is staggering. It begins with the original sin of this case, the Iowa Parole Board's decision to release him after just 18 months of a 10-year sentence. Board was swayed by his Model Prisoner Act. It completely ignored the explicit warnings from medical professionals that he was dangerous and would reoffend. This raises a chilling question for any society. What is the purpose of a justice system? Is it primarily for rehabilitation or for public protection? In Gacy's case, the system's tragic optimism in its ability to reform a diagnosed psychopath directly led to the deaths of 33 people. When he returned to Chicago, the failures compounded. A new sexual assault charge was dropped. His parole officer remained unaware of it. His criminal record from Iowa was eventually sealed, effectively giving him a fresh start. In the pre-digital age, there was no national database, no effective communication between jurisdictions. Each failure emboldened him, reinforcing his narcissistic belief that he was smarter than everyone else, that he was untouchable. The fact that he passed a Secret Service background check months before his arrest is the ultimate indictment of a fragmented and fallible system. Beyond the legal system, Gacy's crimes expose a deeper, more painful societal wound. This is perhaps the most tragic societal failure of all. Gacy didn't choose his victims at random. He was a strategic predator. He overwhelmingly targeted runaway boys, hustlers, and young men who were either gay or perceived to be. He did this for a cold, calculated reason, he knew that in the 1970s, society was far less likely to look for them. The prevailing social stigma against homosexuality became his unwitting accomplice. When parents or friends reported these young men missing, their concerns were often dismissed by law enforcement. The assumption was that they were just runaways or that it was homosexual stuff that was best left untouched. This created an implicit hierarchy of victimhood. The disappearance of a young gay man was not treated with the same urgency as that of a suburban cheerleader. These victims were marginalized in life, and that marginalization made them invisible in their disappearance. Gacy didn't just find victims, he found a category of people society had already deemed disposable. He weaponized prejudice. He hunted in the shadows of society's own biases, confident that his victims' cries for help would go unheard. This case forces us to confront the terrifying reality that our prejudices don't just hurt feelings. They can create hunting grounds. Finally, we must look at the people closest to him, his neighbors, his employees, his own wife. Why did no one see? The neighbors who heard muffled screams but dismissed them. The employees who dug grave-like trenches for drainage. His wife, who noticed the foul odors and found other men's wallets but accepted his glib explanations. It is easy to cast blame, but the phenomenon at play is a deeply human one known as cognitive dissonance. It is the profound mental discomfort of holding to contradictory beliefs at once. My neighbor is a friendly, hardworking man, and my neighbor is a monstrous serial killer are two thoughts that cannot comfortably coexist. For most people, it is psychologically easier to rationalize, to deny, or to explain away red flags than to confront the terrifying reality that evil can live next door. Gacy's friendly persona, his community involvement, his clown costume, they were all part of an elaborate defense. This defense preyed on our fundamental desire for the world to be normal and safe. He did more than just kill people, he shattered the social contract. He violated the unspoken trust that allows communities to function. He showed us the true banality of evil, that it doesn't always come with a devil's horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes it comes with a smile and a handshake. The Gacy case, therefore, is far more than the story of one evil man. It is a chilling case study, a mirror held up to society, forcing us to confront not only the darkness that can fester in the human soul, it also forces us to see the dangerous blind spots within our own communities and the very systems designed to protect us. It's a lesson in the catastrophic cost of unexamined prejudice, of bureaucratic failure, and of our own powerful reluctance to believe the unbelievable. On March 13, 1980, a jury found John Wayne Gacy guilty on all counts and sentenced him to die. But the end of the trial was not the end of the story. For 14 years, Gacy lived on death row, a celebrity monster of his own making. He never stopped manipulating, never stopped playing games. He gave interviews proclaiming his innocence, taunting the families of his victims.